Alright folks, we have another video coming at you for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. We're going back to my Skaven, my favorite faction. Today we're going to be covering the Skaven crap stacks. I got a couple different looks for you. This crap stack is composed almost entirely of basic Skaven slaves, a couple assassins of various trait for utility on the campaign map and replenishment, and of course a Grey Seer Plague. Now the general tactics that we're going to be using here are rush, and then tie the enemy down while we bombard them with magic. We'll use the assassins to take out their lords and heroes as necessary. And really, this is one of those armies that is highly expendable. It's really cheap, easy to produce. You can mass produce these. You can send 2 or 3 of them in a region against superior forces for the purposes of softening them up before your main army comes through and really dings them up. You can afford to lose them. Now, what I would say is that you either want to have expendable trait lords, or you want to have immortal lords. And in this case, we do have an immortal Grey Seer. He's over level 20. And for that reason, I would say that this is not the army that you want to recruit like turn 1. This is more of a early mid-game to late mid-game army. And you use this to create ambush traps, because an army will see all these Skaven slaves and be like, oh, I could chew on that. Or you can use it to take minor settlements or beat up minor armies. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if you lose this army because it's really cheap. I'll show you the cost of it after the battle here. But the main tactic is to tie down our enemy here and then just keep smashing it with as much magic as we can out of our Grey Seer. We're going to send the assassins here around the back, try to get a shot on the Lord there. If we had heroes, we would take them out as well. And the reason we have 2 is so that one of them is disciplined, and the purpose of that is to add a buff to the army, and the other one is of random trait that we can use on the campaign map. And the purpose of that is to weaken an army before we get there, or assassinate a key hero, or have them around for the purposes of taking out anything that can detect our ambush, should we decide to use it as an ambush trap, but still have one in the army so that if we do get sufficiently beat up, that we can replenish quickly. So we get a little bit of flanking technique going on here. Again, we're going to take mass casualties on these crappy Skaven slaves. The other thing that I will say about this is it's important that your food is high when you're using this, because you can see these guys are standing around for quite a bit, taking some abuse. If you don't have the food reserves on the campaign map, then these guys are literally going to rout within seconds of becoming engaged with any target. So it becomes a lot harder to use this crap stack if you're not managing your food properly. This Grey Seer has obviously got a lot of utility with him because he's high level. You want to focus predominantly on getting your, I think it's called Plague Breath. Pestilence Breath, yeah, Pestilence Breath. You want to use the Pestilence Breath attack most frequently, and use your summons for the Vermintide only where necessary, but your real damage dealer is going to be your Pestilence Breath, and you should put 2 points into that when possible. I'd say one of the benefits of this army is that it's really easy to use, as long as you can effectively use magic and know when to cast and when not to cast, how to manage your magic reserves, and the like. Also, not getting your lord surrounded by a whole bunch of infantry, particularly when they're on the Plague Furnace like this, because it can take a lot of melee damage being on a large mount like that. Now, even though I sacked this settlement, I'm going to go ahead and occupy it, because the thing about an army like this is it's going to have to replenish on the regular. And we're also in unfavorable territory here, so we're going to need the extra help of capturing the settlement. And what we do is just go ahead and capture it at tier 1. We can sell it off later. Then we'll merge down any units that won't fully replenish, so that we can replenish them manually from the recruitment pool here. Let the bells scream, we just keep in mind how many units we can recruit in a given region, and of course those assassins there are definitely helpful and actually crucial in keeping this army alive. So as I was talking about earlier, if we look at this, this is the cost of this army. It's super cheap. We take a look at one of our other armies, for instance, this weapons team army. Look at the cost of this weapons team army in comparison with our crap stack. So for the price of this single army, we can have a whole bunch of those crap stacks. Now, is this a better army? Yes, it's a vastly superior army. But look how expensive it is, and this takes a whole bunch of specialized buildings. You can recruit crap stacks from provinces with absolutely no buildings in them. Now, as far as strategery is concerned, if we look at this campaign map, this army is going to continue to move across these minor settlements that are barely defended and take all those settlements and probably sell them, while our main army moves on to the regions that are fortified. So that was a really basic crap stack. Now we're going to move on to the upgraded crap stack. I'm going to call this the crap stack with a side of barbecue. And we have diversified this army. We've added a few heroes in there to help with the melee capabilities. Still kept that assassin for replenishment. Still have the Grey Seer in there for magic. But we've also got some backline and what I'm going to call some lateral line in those warpfire throwers. So our tactic here is still going to be to charge, but we're going to do a pincer move here. And the purpose of this is to spread the army and get those warpfire throwers around the edges to really barbecue their units, while those Skaven slave slingers put some pressure on the back lines. Now, the reason we've gone with 2 of the warpfire throwers on either side is in case one of them gets wrecked, we have a backup so that the whole thing doesn't fall apart. So we're going to divide the army really into 2 sides and sort of a center where our caster and heroes hang out for reserve purposes, and then we're going to put the warpfire throwers on the perimeter and basically charge right into this army. Now, whereas the previous army was a really cheap alternative, this one's a little bit more expensive. I'll show you what it costs after we get through the battle here. But the only thing you really need to recruit this army is a tier 2 settlement. So you need tier 2 to be able to get to the chieftain recruitment. You need tier 2 to be able to get to the assassin recruitment, and you need the tier 2 for the purposes of getting the warpfire throwers. Simultaneously, our Skaven slave slingers are going to start putting some pressure on those back lines, any of their missile units, and any of their highly mobile units. Usually, the highly mobile units are going to be weak on armor too, so they can be effective. Skaven slave slingers punch way high for their pay grade. As I mentioned, this army is a little bit harder to recruit than the first crap stack, but this is more reminiscent of an army that is going to be your go-to for probably the first 20-30 turns of your campaign, until you can get some rattling guns, some Jezzails, some artillery, etc., etc. Or if you're playing like I am as Clan Eshin, you can get to the gun runners, doom stacks that we will actually cover in our next video. We're going to touch on a couple variations of the fast and stealthy. We're going to do a second video on army compositions that deal with like the sneaky, fast, stealthy side of the Skaven roster, and then we'll do a third one that deals almost entirely with weapons teams. And that way, when I'm talking about different things in future videos, I can just reference you to one of these 3. I really admit to being somewhat of a Skaven specialist, to the point where I try to think of other factions in terms of how can I take the mechanics of the Skaven and the tactics of the Skaven that I like so much, and then adapt those things into those factions. So I think that's why I find the Warriors of Chaos so boring, because while there's a lot of content there, like it's pretty difficult to even set off an ambush as Warriors of Chaos, which I spend the majority of my Skaven campaigns setting up ambush traps. Elaborate ambush traps that end up taking out 2 or 3 armies in a go, and I find those exceptionally rewarding, whereas the Warriors of Chaos is just kind of like a bulldoze. And I find the tactics of the trickery of the Skaven to be a little bit more towards my playstyle, as well as I would say that they have... And the thing about the Skaven is they've got such a deep roster that really you can put anything together and make it work to a degree. I think that these crap stacks that we're covering now are all right for the purposes that they're intended for. which is throwaway armies that don't cost a whole bunch of money, that even if your characters get wiped out, it's not that big of a deal. They're wholly replaceable, and that's just kind of the Skaven playstyle.
Slingers! What? What orders?
So again, if we look at this, all the units that got severely damaged were Skaven slave units and our heroes. Our heroes will replenish. We'll go ahead and fill in the Skaven slave casualties with some more recruitment. And there you have it. There's a look at the upkeep of this army. Pretty cost effective, a little bit more expensive than the last one that we looked at, but this one's got a lot more utility. So again, this is the army that I recruit in my early game, and this is the one I suggested you go for too when you're looking to move towards those heavier weapons teams armies, or those armies that are based on gutter runners. This is your interim army to get there. So anyway, that's the end of this one, guys. Be looking out for the next one that's going to be on those gutter runner based doom stacks.